welcome everyone. This is the CNAB meeting on March 6, 2019. Here we are going to talk about the CNAB specification as well as all related code. If you're not speaking, please mute your mic. We've got a fun agenda, a few demos, and a few different issues and pull requests to talk about. So let's get started. Does anybody who is new want to introduce themselves? I really don't see anyone new actually, so we're all good. Okay, so let's jump into demos. We have two demos today. The first one is from Simon. Simon, are you on?
No, but I'll do it for him. He's got a clash.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, so should I just jump in and share my screen? So basically, this is going to be a quick demo of Docker app using the library that we made for sharing CNABs, which is called CNABs OCI. Well, I'm giving away my demo here. So basically, what we're trying to do here is make it so you can package a CNAB as something that you can store in an OCI registry. That's done with the CNABs OCI package or library, which we've made available to everybody. It's under the Apache 2 license or something sane. So we'd like other people to adopt this as well. I'll give a quick demo of how that works so people can see it in action. And then I know that at least Glenn has a bunch of questions, so I'm happy to answer what I can from that. So if we just look at inside the chat, let me just open up the chat in another window so that I can see if that comes up. Oh, right, so there you go. Okay, so if we just look at what's inside my directory here, this is one of the Docker app demos. Docker app is open source. It's on GitHub docker/app. Here we have a hello world Docker app. If we look at what's inside, we have three files. We have a Docker Compose file, a metadata file, and a parameters file. Docker Compose file is the one that contains the application specification. So what we have inside here is the simplest of all compose files with these two values, the text and port, which are variables, which are then specified as default parameters inside the parameters YAML, so that you can see the default values of them. So what we can do is we can inspect this. Just gives you a slightly nicer view of what the app is. Since if you don't know what Compose is, then you can see over here what it is. We can also twiddle with some of the settings, so we can set the port to 9999, for example, and you'll see that it'll change the output. The reason that takes a little bit of time is because we've implemented inspect as a custom CNAB action, so it's rebuilding the invocation image each time I run that command. All right, so now for the fun part. We want to be able to push this. So what we want to do is you'll see we've got something quite similar to what we have for images, for Docker images. We can do a Docker app push. It'll find the application because I've got it in my folder over here. We'll give it a tag. I'll put it up in my, let me see, I think I made a CNAB demo repo. Oh, and I probably pushed it earlier, so it may be quick. And what this is going to do is package it as an OCI index and then push, make sure that all the images are pushed into my repo. The reason we push all the images into the same repo is because that simplifies the RBAC and makes sure that if we move this application from one repo to another, we guarantee to have exactly the same UX, exactly the same experience, which is good. So we can see here that everything was already up. All the heavy lifting here is done by CNABs OCI. So now, if we want to inspect this application, so I'm going to inspect it directly from the registry. Hello, I think I put CNAB demo 0.0. We'll see that it's pulling it down transparently in the background, and it shows us the output. You'll notice one big difference here, one difference between the version that I initially inspected and this one. So you'll notice that we fixed the image shars when we pushed it. That is to make sure that's because in order to have sanity in terms of the images, we need to fix them to a specific SHA when we push to a registry, because if we reference them by name, the image could be removed or something else. So by fixing the SHA, we're guaranteed to have exactly the image that we want in the registry. So I can demo how to deploy and things like that, but I think that's not the interesting part for the CNAB people here. It's completely transparent, the CNAB stuff. There is one command that would interest people here. We can do a Docker app bundle. And what that does, if you look at my images, I have an invocation image now. And if you look over here, I have a bundle.json, which people who've worked on the spec will recognize this. I don't know if we'll have that in the final version because that's pretty not interesting for most people, but yeah, it exists right now. Are there any questions?
Yeah, this is really cool. So I did have a question about the SHA, since I'm doing some digest and SHA work on Duffle. Did you calculate the SHA locally before doing your push, or did you grab that SHA after you push to the registry?
I believe you have to do it afterwards because it's the registry that generates the content SHA. So because the layers are, or because it's referenced by a content hash, depending on how the registry stores it, that SHA could change.
Okay.
So you can look inside the fixup part, the fixup command for the CNAB OCI stuff. Let me see if I've got a OCI. I was busy. Reviewing things. There's a fixup command, I think. So this is the library, but we also provide a simple binary which lets you play with it a bit. There's a fixup command, and basically what that does is sorts the digest. So if you just dive into that, you should be able to see everything you need.
Okay, yeah, I'll definitely take a look. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Does anyone else have questions for Chris?
It's Steve. I just wanted to comment. The experience is awesome, and everybody's been working really closely to get that pulled together. And the simplicity of push and pull and deploy and all that is great. On the reference to the implementation, was still, while it is an OCI, technically spec, we have not agreed upon how we're going to get registries to understand these things yet. So I think we should be slower in adoption of what we think we're going to have on the registry side, so we can understand these. And at this point, it puts the burden on every registry to deeply understand the CNAB, and that's not our goals on that front. So there's still work to go. We're still working on it. I just want to temper the where we are on the registry storage side. And I believe Matt said last week that was one of the goals of this week, was to start focusing on how we define the persistence format, so all registries can easily support CNABs and other artifacts.
Yeah, so there's definitely work to do there. What we've tried to do here is use existing infrastructure, so it works on registries as they exist right now. The trade-off there is, as Steve pointed out, that the registries may not have the information they need. The proposed workaround for that for now is to have a well-known annotation to specify the type at the top level, because we don't have a media type at the top level of an OCI index. I need to coordinate with the Helm people to make sure we do the same thing there at least. I think later on we'll find a perfect solution or a better solution for how to do this though.
Just because we're not doing a public demo necessarily for people outside of CNAB just trying to learn it, this is more of our dev call. I do want to encourage us to actually focus on coming up with a solution and not just assuming optional annotations is the solution. So I'm happy to not have that conversation now. We have it later, but we do need to finish having that conversation.
Yeah, let's definitely do that offline. Maybe like later on today in the CNAB channel. Thank you. Carolyn, you had a question, right?
Yeah, I missed if this was baked into Docker app or if this was a library that I could play with and try out with Porter.
It's a library. It's CNAB to OCI. I will post a link quickly into I'll post a link. Let me see if I can just edit the notes and I'll just chuck it in there.
Thanks. I chucked it into the notes already.
Oh, Jeremy's on top of things. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Jeremy.
Radu also had a question. Could you walk us one more time through how the artifacts arrive in the registry, the bundle file, and the images? Does the library have a story for signed bundles?
We don't do the signing yet, but because it's just an OCI index, you should be able to do it anyway. We need to. I haven't played with that yet, but it should work because it's an OCI index. We're not using a custom image type here. Let me just check the questions over here. So how do the artifacts arrive in the registry, the bundle file and the images? So we first push up all the dependent images. So in this case, Docker app is giving the CNAB to OCI thing a list of images, which, so hold on, we just inspect. So we only have one service image here, which is the hello, the service image for hello, which is a HashiCorp HTTP echo. That's pushed up first. We check if it's there first, and we push it up. And then we push up the invocation image as well, because that's another one we need. Once we have all that information, we can put it inside. We can construct the OCI index that we push to the registry with all the information, all the links to this. So we start from the outer leaves and work our way back up the tree. Is that clear, Radu?
Perhaps Radu doesn't have audio, but Radu, feel free to.
Yeah, I've got the chat open, so I can. Yeah.
And oh, go ahead. I did have a question. So the image is HashiCorp / HTTP echo. How do you do the renaming, like to actually push to your own repo?
Yeah, so that's where the image map stuff in the spec comes into play. So okay. Basically what we do is, well, I haven't done this before. If we look, so this is completely, we're going to look inside the invocation image here. Oh, that's not being very helpful. What is it? It's a CNAB demo 0.1.0.invoc. If we look inside here, we'll see that the you'll see that we're just leaving that string inside there, and what we do is we pass the image map into the invocation image as an environment, as a set of environment variables, and then our custom binary, the run one here, that one does a replace inside the compose file before we deploy. So basically, that way we can keep the contents of the invocation image static, and then make it so that when we move it to a different repo and the prefixes and whatever change, we can just substitute them in at runtime. Is that clear? Or
yeah.
Thank
you. Does anybody have any final questions for Chris? Then we can move on to our second demo.
Just a question about the digest of the bundle. Would it be possible to change the algorithm so that it was stable between repositories?
No, because it's content addressable. And so because the registry decides, the registry is the one that's storing it, it needs to find them later. So it needs to be on the registry side. We could all agree upon an algorithm. I think Steve would probably be for this as well. But in terms of making it content addressable, I don't see an easy way of doing that.
Okay.
Define content addressable in this case? Is it the SHAs you're worried about?
Yeah, so if we have content addressable things, however the registry stores it will define that SHA. Unless we add an abstraction where the client, now I'm completely spitballing, but if the client were to generate some other SHA, I think there's some work on this. I'm not a registry person though, so I'm not the best person to ask.
Well, that's why I want to understand the question, because several of the clouds, including Azure, we support an import API, because this happens with any image, any artifact, which image is the majority of them. When you pull a compressed thing out of a registry, and then you're fine because it expands it. But when you try to push it to another registry, even the same registry in another repo, the digest is recomputed, as Chris was mentioning. However, I think it's Google does this as well. I can't remember if AWS does, but ACR has an import API that's a server-side copy, so the digests are maintained. And in theory, that should work for CNAB as well. That's why I want to make sure I understood the question now.
I think we need to have a longer conversation about the digest work, because I think a lot of us are in different areas thinking about it and trying to solve it differently. I was under the impression that if I compress the layers and used the same algorithm that, say Docker registry or Docker Hub uses, then that would just like work across the board, but that was not a correct assumption maybe.
Yeah, it's more nuanced on the operating systems and where the computation is done. And then even the expectation of the user, like a user that does a pull, and then a push to another words, doesn't realize a lot of this stuff is happening under the covers. So that's why they wind up with weird results. But ultimately, it depends on what they're trying to do. If you're trying to say this is a signed thing, there's another effort we're trying to do to make sure that things that are moved between registries, the signature is maintained. So I guess that's why, let's just pull this back up. We can have a more detailed conversation about this.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so we have another demo. Josh Jalitsky, I believe you have some Lua magic to show us, so feel free.
Yes. One sec. Able to see? Okay. My screen?
Yep.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay, so I've been playing with something over the last week. I had been working with Porter and just kind of seeing all the different things that you could build with it. So I put together this project called Lupo, which is Lua plus Porter, and shamelessly stole the logo here. And basically, instead of writing your Porter bundle with YAML, you could do it with Lua. And one of the neat things is you can add like little functions that wrap mixins, or you can grab environment variables and all sorts of things that you couldn't do directly with YAML. And then all you have to do is have a global bundle variable, and using the new Go Lua engine, we're able to grab that off the stack and parse it into YAML. But I got overly interested in Lua over the course of this, and ended up building a sister project called Lupo. And Lupo is essentially the exact same thing as Lupo, except it uses this language called MoonScript. And what MoonScript is actually, if you're familiar with CoffeeScript to Node.js or JavaScript, it basically adds a bunch of new syntax to the language, allows you to do classes, makes things feel a little bit more like Ruby. But anyway, that allows you to do things like this, where you can actually have a class that represents your application, constructors, and then what you can do is kind of have a more expressive flow and add mixins in an object-oriented type of way. And then at the end of the day, just exporting that bundle variable. So I put together after putting this together, I'm like, is this even something anyone would ever use ever? So I put together a demo, and I put the link in the notes, but it's Porter Moon demo. And this was about as far as I could take this concept, I felt. Potentially, we'll see what else can be done. But yes, Sailor Moon. If you watch the introduction video by Leaf, who's the creator of MoonScript, he says it's the first programming language inspired by Sailor Moon. So,
Excellent.
yeah, so we can move forward with confidence that this language is for the cloud, for space actually. So yeah, so this was about as tiny and pretty that I could get the Porter definition. Just really like 3 little simple pieces of information describing the just like the metadata and describing the bundle. And then also important information for Porter is the invocation image. So basically we're putting configuration here to say what is the registry that you want to push to, and the idea with this that I had is that you could use Porter actually as a development, similar to like a draft or something along those lines, where you could actually use it as a per developer tool, and you can push to your own namespace in the registry, and then default tag it with a -develop tag. And you can see like in Docker Hub, I have these pushed here. And then this My Cloud App class is the actual thing that contains the like the brains about what this application does. So the downside of this is you can't, looking at this, see exactly what's going on. But the upside is you can look at what the resulting YAML actually would be, and it's a bit more, it's a bit longer, and there's quite a bit of duplication here. So let's see. So yeah, so the My Cloud App class, it's even like going as far as to inherit from a base class called app, and the base class, it simply just has the bundle here, takes in that configuration block. It creates the invocation image using the fields from that. So we go back here and just look like host repo tag. It concats these things together correctly to create the invocation image. Sorry about this, hold on. And then, yeah, so it extends that, that MoonScript class, and then we add our mixins. So to take a step back, what this app does is deploys, so here's this, you're familiar now with this HackMD app that we use for the CNAB notes. You can actually deploy this on its own. It's a project called Cody MD that backs us. But anyway, you need persistence for like the different documents that you save. So it uses Postgres for that. So I decided to use the Azure mixin to launch a Postgres database in Azure. And then I haven't been able to work with the outputs, CNAB outputs yet. I'm going to talk with Jeremy and Carolyn about that. But essentially doing a Helm install of the HackMD chart, pointing to the host that was just put into the host of the database server that was just deployed.
Oh yeah, that's a bug. Sorry about that.
All good. I assume, yeah, it was strange. But then finally adding the different steps to the Porter YAML. So in order, install the Azure database, and then install the Helm chart. And then for upgrade, we just have a Helm upgrade. And for uninstall, we just have a Helm delete. But yeah, I mean, the great thing about this is that the mixins can have their own kind of logic, and we can really string things together. And so, for example, Helm, it's just returning a block of YAML that has Helm as the top level key, and then all of these required values. So we're able to construct a class with the chart name, chart version, and then get all of this information out of there. And then the Azure one, similar. You can see I was trying to do stuff with outputs here. But yeah, anyway, so to run this, you can use the Lupo tool, and all that Lupo really does is converts Porter Moon to Porter YAML. So you can, all it does is does that, and then take the arguments that were passed to it and pass it along to Porter. So what you can do is,
Gotta say, I do love the name Lupo.
yeah, thanks. I know.
It's really fun to say.
This is the next big thing. Yeah, so typically you run porter run action install. So instead Lupo run action install does the conversion. In this case, the Azure database was already installed previously, so it moves along, and then it runs the Helm install. The arguments. Here's all this stuff going on, and
Oh no, can people hear anymore?
no, I silence myself. I have a really loud keyboard.
Oh,
Sorry. Yes, I'm here. Well, it's just showing the app's deployed now. I already had this database from a previous installation, this is why I like the cloud so much.
Feel free to tell us your secret passwords.
Yeah, ABC 1 2 3. So here's my documents. Here's my documents from before, saved in the cloud, using the cloud, Azure Cloud. Copyright. Yeah, that's it. If you want to check this out, the source is at J. Dolitsky Porter Moon demo, and I put a link in the notes as well.
Awesome. Thank you. That's super cool. I'm like all for better developer UX and all that. So this is really nice. And also I come from a Ruby background, so
Thanks, Michelle.
Extra nice. Does anybody have any questions for Josh?
Not necessarily a question. Sorry. Was there a question for me?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Karen.
Did you have a question too, Radu? You go first. Sorry.
Okay. It's mainly that's a really cool demo, Josh, and I know it's been put together in a week or so. That's fantastic. So the question for everyone on this call is, what programming language would you use for something like this? Do you have any other programming languages in mind that we'd use to encapsulate different types of applications and then reuse them in bundles? Are you okay with YAML? Would you use something like Lua or MoonScript or something else?
You're asking others?
I'm asking everybody. You included.
Well, yeah, I mean, Gareth put together a Python client for CNAB, and essentially at the end of the day, I mean, even Porter is pumping out a bundle JSON, right? So, yeah, I don't know. It seemed, after playing with this, it does seem to be, I've sort of fallen in love, and it does seem to be a great way to build YAML. It's like YAML ++ to me. But yeah, I'm very interested to hear if anyone else even is interested in using Lua or MoonScript at all.
Radu, you had something to say?
It can be an ongoing discussion. I'd like to bring this up next week as well with people who have some time.
Yeah, one of the things that was said in the GitHub, I originally opened a GitHub issue on Porter about this, and one of the things that was said is like, apparently there's a previous issue to use like HashiCorp language and to use like all these different things. So maybe Porter can have some sort of plugin system that allows you to write these things in whatever you want. And then it's just the interface.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask about. I mean, longer term is what I noticed is you had to write your own CLI. You had to replace a chunk of Porter to do this.
No. It's
go
basically
back to the Mupo.
Yeah, it's pronounced Mupo, please.
Sorry, not Mufo. It looks like you had another command to do the install. You didn't end up going back to Porter.
Well, yeah, so I'm running this, right?
Oh, wait, you're not sharing it anymore.
Oh, geez.
Like you had a Mupo build, right?
Yes.
And it ended up replacing Porter. There was an install command too. Am I right on that?
Sorry. Yeah. So basically, I'll show you what this does. Just to,
like, it looks like it's calling stuff that's in Porter.
It's the type of thing I didn't do much on it because it was the type of thing where I would. Here, let me take a step back. So here's kind of like the main func here.
Yeah. See the run Porter part though? Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. I just want to get to like what my question was, because I think I get what you're doing. Is that it would be nice if Porter had a way for people to plug in being able to make their own transpile from whatever their language is or their way to represent a bundle into something that Porter knows how to run, so that you don't have to.
No, absolutely, and that's what I was saying is you should have similar to the mixins, you should have. I don't want to run the Mupo tool instead of Porter. That's not the point.
Yeah.
It was just that it was a good place to do this without affecting Porter code base. But yes, absolutely. I would love if you could just say Porter build, and if there's a .moon file and you have the MoonScript installed, then it just runs.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying, is that like we could, when Porter is a little further along, or if we can somehow add a discrete hook to let you go off and do this, if you want to work on that, just to get it so that Lupo could keep going and use Porter as the shell, and then, have to replicate. Because like right now, Porter is replicating quite a bit from Duffle, and we're trying to fix that, right? And we're going to start fixing that this week. And I'd hate to see another tool start replicating what Porter, like there's this like cascade of having to replicate. So it'd be great if we could start fixing that with hooks and extensibility points sooner, I guess.
Yeah, well, the great thing about Lupo is it has no logic built in at all. So
yeah,
whatever the format of the bundle, if that changes, or like last week you changed the mixin, how the mixins work, like it's just an object in Lua that you would change the format of.
Yeah, so I don't know if you have time to think about what an intermediate representation would be that other.
Let's chat. We can chat later. I mean, we can chat more. I'd love to kind of. I really think Porter's like a super powerful tool, and I think giving people the ability to use language that isn't YAML might open a lot of possibilities.
Cool. Thanks, Michelle. I'll make an issue and we'll chat about this further later.
All right, thank you. Okay, so there are two issues that are on the CNAB spec repository that are open. It's pull requests 123 and 131. 123 is a breaking change and a really fun number to remember, but basically it's taking the ref section out of the image description out of the spec. So just take a look at that if y'all have time. The more eyes, the better, because we're trying to finalize this spec as soon as possible. Jeremy put together a summary of this week's changes, and Jeremy, do you want to run through that with us?
Just in the interest of time, probably not. But I'll do this every week as we come up with, towards the stabilization of the spec. So inside of that, I put everything that changed from the last meeting. So things that happened before last Wednesday, I didn't include, but I'll do this on a weekly basis, just kind of summarize the things. And it's not including anything that's like changing formatting. It's things that are substantive.
Thanks so much for that, Jeremy. That's way easier to look at than all of the pull requests. And thanks everyone for your pull requests this week. There have been a lot of major changes. Okay, and Radu, do you want to talk about the issue with running invocation images as privileged containers? And
yeah, sure. So initially, when we started with Duffle, in order to have the ability to run Docker Compose example that would affect your local Docker engine, we by default mounted the Docker socket into every Duffle install or Duffle action run that you would run. So essentially, this means that every invocation image that you run with Duffle is a privileged container. So there's an issue to fix that. And now it brings me to the question of, is there any scenario so the only scenario that meets that flag right now is the Docker Compose scenario in the case where you're trying to modify the same Docker engine as the one where your invocation image is running. So the question is, other than examples, other than a demo scenario, is there a real world scenario where you would want to run privileged invocation images? And the second part of the question is, do you see a clear way to continue to support the local Docker Compose scenario with Duffle going forward, other than a -- privilege flag that we can add?
I can answer number 2 because we actually started looking at this for Docker app. So yeah, it caught us a little bit by surprise. You also need to run the container as root to use the Docker socket. So I think the fix for this is to, by default, not do that, but then give the ability to set the container run config, the host config or whatever it's called, to the tool. So if you use Duffle, you should have an option for the driver to tell it which like what mounts to make, if we want to make local mounts, and then things like, do we want privileged, what user do we want to run the container as, stuff like that.
Okay.
So that way we can leave it up to the tooling.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the second part of the question is, do we have a clear guidance on how to provide Docker engine certificates and the master Docker engine URL for running production Docker Compose or Docker Swarm thing?
Yes. So Simon put up a PR a while ago inside the Docker CLI. We've added context support. Basically, what this lets you do is store certs and endpoints as a list, kind of like what you do for Kube, basically. And so with that, I can quickly demo it if we have some time, but otherwise, because it requires a custom Docker CLI and the latest version of Docker app before it works. Basically, what you can do is when you install a Docker app, you can specify a target context, and then that passes the information into the Docker image. So yeah, it's much cleaner than passing cert files and environment variables for managing Docker.
Okay, because I realized that it would break a lot of scenarios if we just remove the ability to mount the Docker socket. So as long as we make sure that a bundle cannot modify the properties that we pass to the driver, so that a bundle could pass the privilege flag and do other things, then unless anyone has other objections to having the privilege flag, then I guess that's the way forward.
That sounds good to me. I would say just leave it up to the tooling. Let the tooling be able to give a container config. If there are cases where people need to do privileged stuff or mount the Docker socket, let them do it. For Docker app, what we're planning on doing is just if we get a context that targets the var run Docker sock or the named pipe on Windows, then we'll mount it, but otherwise we won't. We also plan on running the containers as unprivileged, so in the sense of the invocation image will not be root, except for the case where we mount the var run Docker socket.
Okay, and is there something that we, as people working on Duffle and other tools like that, can have a look on the implementation for Docker app?
We just got a new hire, and I was going to get him to pair program this in Duffle tomorrow. That's or sometime later this week. So hopefully we can do that. It just depends on availability of people in my team, but we're hoping to contribute that upstream.
Okay, that'll be fantastic. Okay, just ping me whenever before you start working on that. So if there's anything that I can help with, that would be glad to. Thanks.
Yep, we'll do.
So, Radu, we can just merge what you have, the logic you have to remove the Docker socket stuff, and then Chris and the new hire can work on contributing, right?
It might make sense to do both in the same
okay.
because otherwise we'll break the examples. So maybe let's just do an atomic thing where we'll just we'll take Radu's commits and use that and then build on it or something.
And also make sure to merge the bundles PR at the same time, which would fix the Docker Compose samples as well. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thanks. Okay. We also have an item on our agenda about adding maintainers. So this is specifically for the CNAB spec repo. Can anybody speak to that? But I believe there was a conversation in the CNAB channel about it.
Yeah, I think Butcher wanted me to add this, and I think looking back at the Slack channel, there was just some discussion about when things could get merged and who had write access. So it's probably time, in relation to the next item, to start thinking about how we nominate more maintainers and how we move towards having like an LGTM2 policy.
Gotcha. Yeah, so generally in Helm, how it works is we have the set of core maintainers, and they nominate someone to be a new maintainer, and then we have we ask the potential maintainer if they'd like to take on maintainership, and then we'll have a vote, and that will determine yes or no. And we also have I think, yeah, so that's what the process is right now. If we like that process, we can adopt it. I think Butcher had suggested we go with the Helm one, but is there any other process we want to consider?
Should we open a PR with that and people can review it?
Yeah. Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
Awesome, thanks. And then to the next point, should we start requiring 2 LGTMs? So this is, right now we've been pretty lax about it, but since there are more people, joining in on the spec conversation and want more opinions and perspectives, I think it makes sense to require 2 LGTMs, especially on the CNAB spec, just so we know there's more than one set of eyes on it. Is anyone opposed to that? I think there's enough activity to require that.
Yeah, and I think it would also help with the pace that we merge the PRs. So you have a look on the PR key, you see that there's only one LGTM, and you go ahead and you do it and merge it if it's in good shape. Right now, we've been going back and forth between, can you have another look at this? Is it okay to merge it? And I think it's time we formalize that process.
Okay, sounds good. All right, I'll open up an issue about that as well, and then we can just offer transparency, and then we can put that in our documentation as well. Okay, and if there's time, discuss next steps. I'm reading off the agenda. Discuss next steps for issue 95. Does anybody want to speak to that? Glenn, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I dropped that in. Most of issue 95 has been solved by recent spec changes, so we now know how thick bundles are represented. But we don't have a standard way for the invocation image to get hold of the contents of the artifacts directory. And early on in the issue, we discussed possibly mounting a copy of the contents at a standard location. And I wondered if there was some issue with that, or whether it was just, yeah, we can do that and just need a PR to implement it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, what Duffle import does right now is it takes whatever is in your artifacts directory and loads it up into your local Docker store. That doesn't handle the VM story, and it also doesn't. Duffle import doesn't handle the new spec changes as well, where you have a layouts directory instead of the image tar file. So, so that's also something to consider. Your invocation image, when it comes to OCI images, is going to need the images to be, the referenced images to be imported into your local Docker store. So that's something that import handles. If they're in a standard location, I'm not sure exactly what import would or should do in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, this is to support the image relocation story. And so in that case, the invocation image is going to do some processing of the images and push them up to a registry. So it doesn't want the runtime involved at all.
So I think this, and that's why I'm going to say it and maybe just rephrase the question. I thought this was part of the registry or the persistence part of the spec that Matt moved out of the core, and that was the one that we were going to work on next, because there's a bunch of questions around how the layers and things are being structured that I think we should review in more detail to support things like moving things between registries, pulling artifacts out that when you don't necessarily need the invocation image, do you require a Docker build just to be able to push a CNAB? So I've been holding those conversations until we had the persistence part of this spec discussion started.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't really seen much of that context.
Radu had something as well.
Yeah, thanks. So this is mainly a question of where we want to have that logic, whether it should be a runtime responsibility or an invocation image responsibility. And I think there are downsides to both approaches. So I think that we should have a separate discussion on that where we could think about it a little bit more. Does it make sense? Does anyone, first of all, see major advantages to one versus the other, to runtime responsibility versus invocation image? Mainly because it will make invocation images more difficult to build than just a run script.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one significant advantage is that it allows arbitrary image types to be handled without having to perturb the spec or the runtime.
Yeah, so let's definitely keep continuing on that thread that you have there on this subject. I do have some thoughts. I've been considering, I don't think that the invocation image should have to handle figuring out where the images should go. I think that they should just be in the right place, and that's the responsibility of the tooling to figure out, make the invocation image as simple and as logicless as, it already has so much logic in it, so that part should be easy. Plus we already tell it where parameters are, where to find credentials. I think if it's already given where to find your images, then it will help the invocation image not have to do as much.
Okay, there's definitely a couple of camps here, and
yeah,
need to kind of pull the threads together, and I'm not quite sure where the discussion should happen. You see, that's the difficulty.
Yeah, let's continue on the thread and in the channel, and then let's make this a priority to discuss a little bit more at the next call as well.
Okay, it's the end of my day, but I'll certainly start off the thread there.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Let's see. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to chat about or ask about? Okay.
Well, I can just add to that. I do agree with Radu that at least the Docker app approach for this is that the runtime tooling is handling the images. We then use the image map to dynamically change them at runtime. So the idea is you have an image map where you have the image that you reference inside your invocation image, and you inject a map so that you can let the invocation image dynamically change those if necessary. But we generally don't manipulate images from the invocation image. We do that from the Docker app tooling. So,
have you seen the ref change? Pull request 1, 2, 3.
I saw that Simon commented on it, and that's it. If Simon is okay with it, then I'm okay with it. Yeah, sorry, I haven't had the bandwidth to keep up, unfortunately.
All right. It's just removing the ref section, so I just want to make sure you saw that, and that's okay with y'all.
Yeah, because the image map's essentially going away, isn't it? The ref section's going away.
Yeah. So if that is going away and y'all use that, then that would be an issue.
Yeah, I'll double check with Simon, but I saw that he reviewed it, and if he's confident, then we should be okay.
Okay. Glenn, I've also been considering adding like proposing an artifacts.json file that lives at the root of the artifacts directory, which would tell you what artifacts you have in the artifacts directory and then where it's located, and that might help from a tooling perspective, figure out where to place the images so that the invocation image can use it. But I will write that up.
Okay, yeah, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
I guess this would also impact pushing and pulling, right? If would we want to allow something like for a certain artifact type, we want to push to a certain storage repository, so the storage bucket or something else, so that you would have a specific, something like a mixin that would know how to push a certain artifact type, annotated in a certain way. Would that help in any way to get the responsibility out of the invocation image and into the tooling?
So this goes back to some of the persistent stuff. My understanding was the invocation image was the things it took to install the thing, like the runtimes, but all the individual artifacts that you would use, like YAMLs and Helm charts and ARM templates, or all those things aren't actually in the invocation image. Those are actually other artifacts that can be pushed and pulled to a registry independently. And that's why I've been holding the conversation until we get to the registry part of the spec. Because I think the idea is you want to be able to push this thing holistically to a registry, and then you can move it to another registry and to another registry and so forth. But there's efficiencies on what gets pulled and what gets pushed. So I don't have to pull all these different layers each time.
Okay. All right, Steve, where is that conversation happening right now?
Well, there's from an OCI perspective, we're working on how we going to support different artifact types, and we've got the individual artifacts done. The index is actually still the open issue, so that's the piece that I'm encouraging us to have more conversation. As far as the CNAB and how CNAB pushes things to a registry, that's the one I've been asking questions, but I heard in last week's meeting that Butcher said we were going to pull that out of the core CNAB spec, and there was going to be a registry part of the CNAB spec, and that's where these conversations were happening. So I don't see the conversation happening yet. I see some execution happening, but I don't see the conversation happening, and I'm waiting for that part of the spec to start.
Yeah, okay, so that just, I think what I got from that is that we need to follow up with Butcher to see if he has an open issue and what's going on with that, because I haven't followed up with it either. So let's follow up with Butcher and make a note of it on our notes.
Yeah.
So maybe I just asked the question, did I misunderstand last week when he talked about a bunch of things he was pulling out of the core spec? Like things like signatures, I can't remember some of the other ones, but I think signatures was one, and I thought persistence was a separate one that he was literally pulling out of the core spec, and there was going to be a separate spec for that. Did I misunderstand that?
No, he's been pulling them out, but it still lives in the same place. It's just not part of the core spec, so people aren't required to follow it.
Okay.
Let's follow up with him.
Okay. As part of this topic, if anybody's got pointers to issues, threads, repositories, PRs, you name it, just dump them in Slack, so at least we've got a chance of finding them and shepherding them, as it were.
Yeah. Definitely. Awesome. Does anybody have anything else? Otherwise, we will just end a few minutes early. Okay. Have a wonderful week. See y'all in Slack.
Great. Thank you.